Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our third and final power lunch of the fall semester. I am Jennifer Banda, the director of the Center for Women in Law. At the center, our mission is to help law students and lawyers confidently build, navigate, and advance their careers. During this Susan Blount Power Lunch series, we introduce you to prominent lawyers from a wide range of career paths for a thoughtful conversation on legal careers and lessons learned. Today's event has been certified for 1 hour of ethics CLE. So if you are in the room and plan to claim your CLE, make sure you sign in. If you are streaming on Zoom, we will note your presence. And if you have called in by phone, we don't have your name, so please email us with your name so we can send the CLE information to you. So welcome to those in the room and on Zoom. We're really glad to have you here. This series is named for Susan Blount. She is a founding member of our center who generously served as our interim director in 2019. This speaker series and all of our programming is only possible through the generous donation of our members. I encourage you to check out our website for future programs, and we would love for you to support the center. Look for a link in the chat because we want to make it as easy as possible for you to support us. So let's get to today's main event. I am thrilled to introduce Arleas Upton Kea. Arleas is a trailblazing attorney and a public servant with more than 35 years of experience at the intersection of law, government, and financial services. She is a native Texan. She received her undergraduate and law degrees from UT Austin. She began her career in Washington, D.C. as a young attorney and ultimately worked her way up and served in several different and very important roles at the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. We know it as the FDIC. At the FDIC, for more than 35 years, she served as Deputy General Counsel, the Ombudsman, Deputy the Chairman for External Affairs, and Chief Operating Officer. Throughout her tenure, she played a central role in managing several national financial crises. She also forged innovative approaches to regulatory ombudsman practices, founding the Coalition of Federal Ombudsmen. Arleas is known for her abilities in organization transformation and succession planning to identify new talent and develop other people. She also has mentored countless young professionals here at the University of Texas and beyond. She brings her legal and operational expertise to the corporate world as an independent board member, serving as the chair of the Ethics and Compliance Committee at Thrivent Mutual Funds. She is a 2020 University of Texas Distinguished Alumna, which is a huge honor at the University of Texas. She is currently serving as the president of the Texas Exes, which is the Alumni Association for the University of Texas. Here at Texas Law, she serves on the Law School Foundation Board. She's been an adjunct faculty member at the Center for Women in Law. She is a champion in our power circles, which is part of our leadership. And make sure, for those of you in the room, her portrait hangs right outside the auditorium. So you can see her live and in person, but you can also see her in her fantastic power red suit every day outside the auditorium. So I am thrilled to be able to have a conversation with Arleas today. There's so much that we can talk about and that we want to talk about. So welcome, Arleas. We're really glad to have you here.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. It is just my honor and my great pleasure to be here. And one of the first things I'd like to say is just a great big congratulations to you and all of the staff here at the Center for Women in the Law. First, I'm just so proud to be a supporter and a member. And I just think that you are doing incredible things to advance the interest of all of our female lawyers, and to also support and inform and continue to educate supporters and men at the law school as well. So thank you for all that you're doing.
I appreciate you saying that. So speaking of the law school, let's start our conversation today talking about, you were here undergrad and then law school. So tell us a little bit about your experience here at UT Law and what stands out from those days.
Well, thank you for that. I do love talking about my law school experience. I started at the law school in 1979, so that's quite a few years ago. Dean Sutton was our dean back then. We had some fabulous professors, and sometimes when I'm out talking with other lawyers and I tell them of some of the professors that I got to experience, they stand back and they say, we've heard about them in history books. Professors like Ernie Smith, who sort of, was the guru of oil and gas litigation. Charles Allen Wright, who wrote all of the books on constitutional law. Dean Keaton, who was the famous tort lawyer. I mean, UT has just maintained this incredible ability to bring in the best and the brightest and the top professors. Now, the environment was very different when I started here. In 1979, it was just a few years after the Supreme Court basically told UT that it had to admit its first student of color, and we recognized that not long ago. There were still just a small number of women at the law school. So every time I come back, I am just so amazed at the strides and the improvement that the law school has made just in terms of the composition of the student body, the programs that it administers. Things that stand out are, part of what I mentioned earlier, the incredible ability of the professors that were here. We had study groups that were incredibly supportive, and that I attribute a lot of that to how I got through law school. I was talking with some of the students in the room earlier, and one of the things that I encouraged and supported was maintaining, building relationships with one another. You're getting a lot from the professors in the classroom, but I feel that I got just as much from the opportunities and the exchanges that I had with my fellow students. And I have to tell you, 40 years later, I am still interacting with some of the individuals that I met when I was in my first year of law school. They're supporters to me. They are people that I call. They're people that I exchange ideas with, bounce things off of. I'm often asked, if you got the opportunity to go to law school again, would you go to this law school, and would you even do law school? And the answer is always yes. It was just an incredible opportunity. There were a lot of challenges, but I feel that there were resources that I was able to take advantage of that allowed me to overcome all of those challenges to get to the point where I am today. So it was a great experience.
I couldn't agree with you more about the relationship building side of law school. I think we focus a lot on the academic side, but I totally agree with you on the relationship building, because those are keys throughout your entire career, no matter what you're doing. So for those of you in the room, I absolutely echo Arleas' comments there. So when you left UT Law, did you go straight to DC, or what was your,
I did. And let me just talk a little bit about that, because back then also UT was known for being a resource for supplying the oil and gas industry with oil and gas lawyers. I mentioned Ernest Smith earlier. And I remember interviewing, for those of you who have been interviewing, I remember I interviewed with, I remember it was Enron, Exxon, Tenneco, Colorado Interstate Oil and Gas. It was all oil and gas companies, and I think I got offers from all of them. Then there was one or two opportunities that I had to go to Washington, D.C. I was very fortunate. One of my mentors from undergrad that carried on into law school was Barbara Jordan. Many of you know her name. If not, I'll just say go out and Google her. But she was a significant politician in the state of Texas who started out in the state and then moved on to the U.S. House of Representatives. Came from an underprivileged background, but was educated in Boston University. And she spent some time in Washington and then eventually moved back and was a professor up at the LBJ school. And that's how I got the opportunity to meet her and develop a relationship. She met me and saw something in me that reminded herself, I reminded herself of her a little bit, is what she said to me. She said, I think you'd be great to go to Washington, D.C. You'd be great in government based on what you have to offer, but don't stay. Come back after a period of time. Well, it's 40 years later, and I'm still there. But it was based on her recommendation that I decided to take the job in D.C. It was in the 1980s, still fairly early 1980s, and you all, if you go back and Google, you can read that almost every day there were banks failing all over the country. and there were savings and loans failing, which had a huge financial impact not only on the banks, but just the whole financial environment, not only nationally, but globally. And I thought, well, that's very interesting. Did not have much experience in that area, but from what I could tell in most of my reading, most of the people who were doing it didn't have much experience either. And I felt I can read it, I can learn it, I can do it. So applied for the job based that on reading an ad in the Washington Post, submitted my resume and got the job. And the first thing that I ended up working on was professional liability, reviewing banks that had failed, and then bringing claims and actions against them for their negligence of their duty as either an officer of the bank or a director of the bank. And then in other cases, we were looking actually at outside counsel who had failed in their duties to the bank as well. And then the other piece of it was looking at the accounting firms who were required to do annual internal audits of the bank. And we were looking to see if they had failed in their duties. And so I had responsibilities of bringing those kinds of cases on behalf of the FDIC. We haven't talked a little bit about what the FDIC does, but let me just go ahead and go into
Please,
that.
as someone who spent her career in healthcare, I would love to have the 101 on the FDIC.
Because a lot of people still, to this day, don't know what the FDIC does. It's government-like, but it's really quasi-government. It was born out of the original banking crisis, which dates back to 1933. Franklin Roosevelt was the president at that time. I see a lot of affirmative nods here. We may talk later, but I got to teach a banking law course here at the law school, and it was the most fabulous thing. And to see people going back and researching what was going on in 1933 and seeing the long lines of people waiting for their money, it was just incredible. But the FDIC was born out of that. When I say it's a quasi-government agency, what I mean by that is it gets its money from the premiums that it charges the banks for the insurance. So it's not a line item in the U.S. Treasury budget. And the only time that the government would have to step in and help to fund the FDIC is if there were catastrophic failures that were larger than the amount of money that is in the FDIC insurance fund. And what the FDIC does is a review on a fairly regular basis. It looks at the amount of money in general that is in all of the banks in the U.S., and it's trillions upon trillions of dollars. Then it looks at the amount of money that it has collected from the individual banks. Premiums is what we call them, for the amount of money that we insure. Of course, there's a huge delta between the two. That's in the billions of dollars, not in the trillions. And so that is one of the things that the FDIC does, is to try to insure the banks in such a way that we won't have bank failures like we had in 1933. And it does that in a number of different ways. It deploys out skilled auditor-type individuals to conduct examinations of the bank, to make sure that their practices are safe and sound, to make sure that when they are giving loans, that there are appropriate practices and procedures around the giving of those loans, so that there are not large numbers of defaults. And so the FDIC has a number of different policies and procedures designed to keep banks open, operating, and safe, ensuring all of the deposits that come in. It does have another huge function, and that's called a liquidation function, which we've not seen a lot of in the last few years. And that's when a bank fails and we have to completely liquidate the bank. There's not another bank that will assume that bank or buy that bank. But the work of the FDIC is just fascinating in and of itself. As a young lawyer coming straight out of law school, when I first started working there, and we were in the midst of a crisis, the savings and loan crisis, winding that up, I used to giggle when I'd get home and I would see on television some of the things I had worked on, or if I would read about some piece of legislation that I had contributed to. realizing that I was fresh out of law school and working on these big things.
So from the application or the job posting in the Washington Post to being an executive in the FDIC, what was that career path? How did you go from one, I know you had several roles there.
It was a long process.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it was a long process. I basically started as a baby lawyer doing everything that anybody asked me to do. And I attribute that to my legal training. I think going to law school here at UT, where there were challenges that I had to overcome, where I felt that the competition was strong every day, it helped me to feel that I could do almost anything. So I would look at something, if I didn't have the skill or the background, I would research it. I would ask people, I would sit, I would think, and then I would come up with their proposal. And then often I would have to present that proposal to a large number of very high level people within the FDIC. So I would raise my hand a lot for extra jobs. I would try to see what things needed to be done. That was recognized, and I found that I was getting promotions fairly quickly. In the legal division, I rose from being a staff attorney to a senior attorney, to being a senior counsel, to being an associate counsel, to being ultimately a deputy general counsel. And that was all maybe within a 10-year period. Then the FDIC, Congress required that the FDIC appoint an ombudsman. Well, again, based on my attendance at UT, I knew, first of all, what an ombudsman was. There weren't a lot of people who even knew what the job of an ombudsman was, but I knew that it was a third-party neutral. And I knew one of my work study jobs that I had as an undergrad was an internship in the office of the ombudsman, which was located at the tower at that time.
What a coincidence.
I paid attention to what I was doing in that job, and it helped me there in the FDIC when I went to apply for the ombudsman job, because I was able to put on my resume that I had worked in the office of the ombudsman. And then, of course, my legal training, I knew how to write that in such a way that if I was a lawyer, I could certainly do the job of a third party. The ombudsman was a fairly high-level job. I traveled directly with the chairman. I was once on a panel, and I see Ashton, I told Ashton the story. I was once on a panel with Jamie Dimon when I was the ombudsman. So it took me to places that were at a fairly high level, just because there was one ombudsman at the FDIC. And then I had a vision for developing a coalition of federal ombudsmen, and I helped to write a lot of the policies and directives for the coalition of federal ombudsmen, which still exists today. But I have to say, Jennifer, I attribute so much of it to the legal training that I had that allowed me to get to that place. As a recognition for the tremendous work that I did as the ombudsman, I was asked to be head of internal operations, which was basically the chief operating officer, and so got that title. And then near the end of my tenure, as I was approaching the 40 years, I moved to become primarily external rather than internal, advising the chairman and the board of directors on all external matters dealing with Congress and media and everybody else as the deputy for external affairs.
So in your 3 decades, I think there was also a number, and you referenced it at the beginning, just of the financial crises. So I know that you also have some pretty extensive experience in crisis management.
Mm-hmm.
So talk about, in those 35 years, I think there were several instances where we had national crises. So starting on the savings and loan crisis in the 80s.
Yes.
So yeah, tell us about how you engaged in those issues and, how your legal experience came to play in that.
Certainly. First, I want to invite all of you to go out and do a little bit of research on the savings and loan crises, because that's very close to home for all of you, because so much of that activity was here in our home state, and it brought me home almost every week. because a lot of what I would do was actually go into the closed savings and loan. And using my legal expertise back then, I did a lot of advising the individuals who were examiners, helping them to look at legal records, helping them to investigate whether we were going to be able to bring or needed to bring legal matters against any of those who worked in the institutions. There were so many instances where we found fraud, where we found negligence, and in all of those instances, as a lawyer, I was the one who was making the determinations on those. But also writing legislation based on some of the things that we found. We would make policy changes, and a lot of those were codified, and we would have to actually change the laws and regulations. So as a lawyer, I was called upon to do that. So that was the first crisis, and it took us maybe about 7 or 8, 9, 10 years to really get through it and wind up all of the affairs. As you all probably know from your studying, it caused basically the Savings and Loan Association and the savings and loans as we knew them back then to all go out of business because the crisis was just so far spread. There are savings banks now, but they are different from the ones that we had back then, different from the savings and loan. And it caused a lot of government agencies to go out of business. There was a Savings and Loan Association as well, and there were creations of new entities. And then for a while, everything was pretty stable as we were resolving the failed savings and loans. I used to like to think crises would come about every 10 years because then about 10 years later, we had the second national crisis that, I was present for. And that was related to mortgages and failures on mortgages. And it was primarily first out in California. But it had a huge impact. Interest rates. I was working for a chairman then, Sheila Bair, who had a great vision, and she saw a lot of this, but there were a lot of things that were going on between the different financial agencies. The FDIC had a great relationship with the Department of Treasury, a great relationship with the Securities and Exchange Commission, a great relationship with the comptroller of the currency. They all work together a lot just in terms of looking at interest rates, looking at mortgages, looking at lending activities. But despite the fact that Sheila Bair was a great predictor and had a great vision for looking at some things that might happen that were very negative to the economy, there weren't a lot of things in place that actually prevented the failure. And there, we refer to that crisis as the Great Recession, and that's the mortgage lending bottom fell out, and it just created an adverse impact all across the nation. During that time is when I moved over to the head of internal operations at the FDIC. I like to tell people as I look back, it seems as though every time there was a great crisis and there were great things going on, I got a promotion. I'm not sure that I actually looked for it, but it just sort of happened, and I think it was because I was out there just doing things and offering advice and just sort of being there.
Solving problems.
And, I'll just say, I think the other great thing about the value of the law school degree that you're getting is it may not prepare you exactly or give you the vision for everything that you will have the ability to do. But I just think that analytical ability that you are developing, some of the Socratic methods that are used in the classroom, and then the challenges that you have to one another if you're still in study groups or if you even just talk to each other and talk about the what ifs, all of that exploratory type behavior does help you when you're then in the working world and you're confronted with things that you have never had to deal with before. The writing of legislation, the drafting, the crafting of new policies. You're not quite sure whether it's the right thing or not, but based on all the experience that you're kind of drawing from, you have a vision for how it should be. And then having the confidence to just move forward with it. So that's two crises. And the third one really was sort of COVID, which is a crisis that I think that we were able to avoid to a great extent. But I was designated the point person with the primary relationship with all of our financial institutions. I would spend time going out and meeting with bankers, learning what their areas of interest were, what their concerns were. And I remember at the beginning, they were telling me, we have too much money in our bank. We're not making loans, because if you're a banker, the way that you make money is by giving loans. That's where you get, that's where you earn your money. People were not spending. There was less credit card debt. People were saving. And so there was a great concern that there was just too much money in the financial institutions. Now, for us at the FDIC, we saw it too, because we went from trillions and trillions of dollars that we were insuring to many more trillions and trillions. So it was a problem. When I was doing that, though, it reminded me of Hurricane Katrina. Some of you probably remember that. There was so much water damage and there was so much flooding. And I went down and took a tour and looked at some of the banks. The vaults were like floating in the water. All the money was wet and unusable. And I had a vision, because I went down, we had an office near there, and I went to the office, and there were FDIC employees with irons and ironing board. We had gone to Treasury and asked them to print more money. And the Fed and everybody talked. It takes agreement by the president and several agency heads to decide to print more money. And the decision was that they were not going to put more money in circulation. They were not going to print more money. And so we had vaults that were just filled with water. And we had individuals standing with ironing boards, ironing bills so that we could put them back into circulation. You all probably remember, ATMs were inaccessible. People didn't have cash. And so part of the way that we helped was to try to get more money back and made available to depositors. It was an interesting time. So that was a big crisis too. Not on the same national level, but Katrina, I would put right up there in terms of one of the crises that I dealt with.
So that's 4.
Yeah.
That's amazing, Arleas. So when you were in the in-house counsel role at FDIC, much like I think a lot of the potential lawyers in the room who could go into a general counsel role, or the people that are with us on Zoom today, talk to us a little bit about how you viewed that role as in-house counsel, because, are you a gatekeeper? Are you governance? Are you, strategic partner? There's a lot of different pieces that come with being, in the in-house counsel role, particularly in a federal agency.
I think this is one of the best questions because there's so much packed in that. I'll just start by saying, when I was a young lawyer, I thought, well, I'm a lawyer and we rule and what we say goes. And, we tell people you can't do that because that's not legal because of this, and this. And I thought that was just the most powerful position to be in. Along the way, as I dealt with more individuals who were on the business side, I just sort of intuitively learned they don't like this. They want to be able to do what they want to do. They want to understand the consequences. But they also want me to be able to tell them what is the likelihood that this consequence would occur. And can I still make a business decision even though there is a legal risk? It took me a little while to learn how to be more collaborative like that as a lawyer. And once I started taking more time to understand the business, to put myself in the position that they were in as a business person, to still keep, the line of, there is a legal risk here, but to present that in such a way that they could balance. And then I had business clients who understood the legal risk, but who wanted to do what they were going to do, and they would explain to me why they would do it. And I'd say, okay, I'm just saying, well, I'm going to have to start doing this to be prepared should you come in and find that somebody has filed a lawsuit against you. And so I think once I became more of a business partner, it was some of that propelled me over to the business side as well. And then once I actually moved completely over to the business side, I thought this is pretty liberating. The lawyers don't necessarily rule, but they are one of several factors, a very important factor that I will take into consideration when I'm making my business. I almost always tried to stay strictly as squarely as I could to the law, but I became better at asking them to give me some options that would keep me, strictly legal, but also allow me to achieve some of our goals. So it was opening up the lines of communication as well. So to get back to your question, I think it is some of all of that. A good lawyer for in-house should understand the business to the extent, depending on what the business is. For me, it was banking. So I went out, walked the trenches with the people who were on the business side, tried to see what they saw, understand what, what their goals were, which helped to make me very much a strategic partner. I could speak the lingo. They love it when you can speak the lingo. And then be able to offer alternatives that were consistent with their goals, but ones that might present less of a legal risk. So I think all of that is so important to being in-house counsel.
I really like to understand the business, walk the trenches, and get the options on what you can and can't do. It's great advice. So I think it's interesting, you've talked just a little bit about how the FDIC engaged with other federal agencies, because they're each their own animal, but they all regulate together. So, what were some of the examples, or how did you engage when you were in those roles with the other federal agencies? Some key guidelines on that.
Yeah, first I should say the FDIC's primary business is insurance. So it insures all of the banks. However, they have a primary regulatory role, not over all of the banks, but just some of the banks, because the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency has a regulatory role. Each state has a regulatory role, and then the Federal Reserve has a regulatory role. But the FDIC gets to look in on all of those because we provide the insurance, and that's our primary interest, is protecting the insurance fund. So as a result of that, oftentimes we would have joint meetings, we would have joint examinations so that we wouldn't subject a bank to several different kinds of examinations. And when a bank is in trouble, we would have joint meetings in terms of talking about how those issues could be resolved. The FDIC's other unique role, it is the only one of those entities that I talked about that has that role of liquidating and actually, all of them participate in the decision if a bank needs to be closed, if a bank needs to be allowed to fail. But only the FDIC participates in taking the assets, selling the assets, and then liquidating and closing out the bank.
And so as you have seen, I guess really you've seen all of the crises that you worked through and oversaw, a lot of the changes that you've seen in the work of the FDIC. What has been sort of the shift in your 35-year career? What were some of the shifts you saw?
Well, I've seen it go both ways. I think after the savings and loan crisis, we had a big piece of legislation, which we commonly refer to as FIREA. I think we saw a shift there in terms of more regulation. We also saw increases in the amount of deposit insurance. There was a temporary increase in following the 2007-2008 mortgage crisis, where it went up to 250. Prior to that, it had been 150. And we always said it was going to be temporary. But one thing we found is once you give something, it's very difficult to pull it back and take it away. So we had to go back out and make it permanent, 250. That was a huge shift. And what we're seeing now is a lot of additional deregulation, a lot more trust in the banks to be able to handle themselves, to do things properly with regard to processes and procedures in terms of, just handling the money, making loans, and ensuring that deposits are protected, working with the FDIC, raising their hand if they need some help from one of the regulators. So, we've seen it go both ways. Dodd-Frank, we've seen a lot of those provisions being repealed, a lot of them, dealing with instructions that are given to banks in terms of who they can deal with. And so I think that there are more changes that are being looked at right now. I think a lot of it will put a lot more responsibility in the hands of the financial institutions. When I used to go out and talk with the financial institutions, there was always a pretty solid line between the small institutions in terms of what they wanted and the larger institutions in terms of what they wanted. A lot of the smaller institutions felt that the regulations were very burdensome and heavy-handed. To some extent, a lot of the larger institutions said, oh no, we need some of these regulations. The market is not going to be able to really react appropriately unless we have some of these regulations. The big constant issue that is being talked about out there is too big to fail in terms of, if an institution just gets too big, there's just no amount of money that we have that's really going to be able to deal with that because of the large amount of money that is in the deposit, it is insured by the deposit fund. So I think that the changes are going to continue. We are in the midst right now, if you're watching just watching the news, reading the Wall Street Journal or any of the other financial institution media reports, we are in the midst now of a lot of changes that is being considered, especially by the FDIC.
Let's switch gears just a little bit because I want to talk about your leadership of people at the FDIC. So when you were there, it was named one of the best places to work in federal government. Mm-hmm. So how do you approach people management?
Well, I'm very collaborative in my approach, and I tried to get my colleagues to be collaborative as well. I guess I'm trying to remember what year it would have been, maybe early 2000s. We actually were one of the worst places to work. I went and I represented the FDIC. The Partnership for Public Service is a big entity in Washington that sort of rates government agencies and what they are like to work for. And I represented the FDIC at a luncheon, and they gave out the awards to the top people. And when it came to be like number 26 or whatever, I stood up. But it was only out of 35. And so I went back and I talked with the chairman about this, and I said, this just cannot be. We have to do something because we're such a highly competitive organization. We're a very professional organization. Everybody here is just so highly educated. And the work that we do is so important to the American public. And she said, okay. And we sat down and we set out a strategy. We had a consultant come in. We put together a lot of focus groups. And then we had employees come up with recommendations for making changes. The other thing that we did back then was a little unprecedented. All top-level managers had to reapply for their jobs. And that was a little scary for everyone. There were some who were reappointed, and there were some who were not. The consultant who came in told us that, there are several ways that you can make changes, but if you want quick change, sometimes you can't take years to have it evolve. You have to change the people and do things immediate. So we had a mix of some of that. And it worked out pretty effectively because within about 2 or 3 years, we rose to be number one and sort of kept that for a number of years going. And so, some of it was a change in policies and procedures, employee focus groups, allowing employees to actually make their recommendations. That all combined with some change in the people. Mm-hmm. Accountability.
So when you were managing a legal team, what qualities did you look for to try to build an effective and a really top talent legal team?
I would say if I got to choose one word, it would be flexibility. I think law school teaches every graduate how to be flexible, and I always look for people who are flexible. One, that they were willing to do any job, no matter how high or how low, that they were willing to study and learn if they were given an assignment that they didn't necessarily have background to do, and that they were willing to be accountable, to raise their hand when there was something that they just couldn't understand or needed more help on. But, I think it all boils down to flexibility and dependability. Because I think anything can be learned. Any aspect of the law, any aspect of what we were doing there at the FDIC during that time, it can be learned.
So you had mentioned that Barbara Jordan was a mentor to you, which is amazing. So talk to us a little bit about, the importance of mentorship and what you impart as a mentor to people.
That's one of my passions. And it was, just a true blessing to me to have her in my life. One of the first things that she said to me when I first met her was that to serve the public is a true honor. And once you receive that honor, then your responsibility is to do something with that. And my interpretation of that, hearing that from her, was that it was my responsibility to do something good. And, she was a passionate public service. And, I think I received that inspiration to even consider public service from her. Growing up here in this part of Texas, I really didn't know anything about federal government or Washington, D.C. or any of that. So everything that I anticipated, expected, and learned about that, I learned from her. I should really share the story of how I first got to meet her. It was not easy. If any of you went to the University of Texas undergrad, they offer a program called Plan 2. That was not my program. I was a liberal arts major, but Plan 2 was in the School of Liberal Arts, and I took one course my last year just because, I didn't really need additional credits. And it was a course that allowed you to design your own plan of study and to find your own professor. And I and one other girlfriend said, let's design a course of 2. And we were sitting on our beds in Jester Dormitory, and we said, let's get the most prestigious professor that there is at the University of Texas. We looked at each other and we said, Barbara Jordan. So we decided, she was a professor across the way at the LBJ school, and so we got all dressed up, and we had little blue suits with a little bow tie in the front and some little pumps, and we took the shuttle bus over there, and we walked to her office, and we told the secretary who we were and that we were there to see Professor Jordan. Well, she looked at us from head to toe, and she said, I'm sorry, she's not in. We said, okay, thank you. When we left, we both thought we detected a shadow in the office, and we felt almost certain that she, in fact, was in, but something about our seeing her on that day just wasn't working. So we developed a strategy, and we said, okay, we've got to meet her directly, because being undergraduates, we're probably just not at the level, and we don't come with credentials that will get us in there immediately, and we've got to get this done. So we decided to stand outside of the LBJ library. If you've been to that side that faces the street over there, it has about 25 doors. So trying to determine which door. So the first day we went and we saw no signs of her. So we got smarter. We looked up her class schedule and we knew what time she would be coming. There was still this issue of 25 doors on that side. We knew that she had come back to UT because of health issues. So we researched where are the handicap parking, and we just hoped that she would have handicap parking. We were in our third day of getting dressed and going over there. Same outfit. And we were so tired that day that we just decided to sit down right on the concrete in front of one of those handicap spaces. And lo and behold, who drives up but her parks right in that spot. So we jumped up, dusted ourselves off, and went immediately to address her and introduce ourselves. And she says, well, come on up to my office. And we were like, oh, gee. We went up to the office and the same secretary, and she introduced us. We pretended as though we had never seen her before. Good to meet you. We knew. And she did the same. And she later became one of our greatest advocates in terms of getting us in. We designed our own course. I can't remember the name of it, but it was something having to do with the state legislature. We would go down every day when they were in session, and we would write a report on the various things that we had heard, and we would add to it our thoughts and our recommendations, and we would go in and present those to her. And that's kind of how I developed the relationship with her, which then lasted way beyond just that course. And, as I came to law school, then I was even closer to her. So that's how I developed the relationship with her. But she was a powerful mentor. She mentored not only me, but, had great interest in identifying talent and then pushing people to be the best that they could be. She helped me a lot with speaking abilities. I love speaking to large groups. I think I got a lot of that from her. She would give me feedback on that. She herself had an incredible voice, just incredible. It could make you do whatever she wanted you to do. But that was probably, I had other mentors. My mother was certainly a mentor. There were other people. There were men in my life who mentored me as well, but she was definitely probably one of the most powerful mentors for me.
Well, if that's not a perfect example of flexibility and perseverance, exactly what you're talking about, that's a fantastic story. So you almost walked a little bit into this question. You have been a lot of firsts in your career, whether first woman of color, first woman, in the different things that you have done. Tell us about the challenges, but also the wonderful things that have happened because you've been able to be the first.
Well, I will say there are a lot of challenges to be the first because you feel like all eyes are on you. You feel like all eyes are judging you. You don't know if you're quite doing the right thing. You don't know how you're perceived because often when you're first, you don't have a lot of people who are giving you feedback. You have a limited number of people who are giving you guidance. You're afraid to share for fear of being tripped by someone who might not have your best interest at heart. And then it's almost like jumping off a high diving board without knowing how to swim. But maybe you can figure out how to float and then do so with confidence. I have to go back to law school. I think being in law school really gave me a lot of confidence and really gave me the training to really be the first and accept being the first. There are a lot of times when people would say to me, I think you should, do something or another that I had not really thought about myself, but they saw something in me that they felt that if you attempt this, you can do it and look at all the other people that might follow behind you. And that has always been my goal. If I am the first, to make sure that I am not the last and to make sure that I am not the only, to find a way to bring people along with me or shortly thereafter. I have always felt that there is always room for someone else. And the fact that I might be very good does not detract from the fact that there might be 5 or 6 others that are sitting out here that are also very good. So there's always room to bring somebody along and to reach back and to groom them, to give them tips, to not allow them to trip the same way that I might have had to trip as I was making my way up the ladder, to give them these tips and to give them this advice. I'm always a little bit shocked when I learn that I am the first to something. I'm always a little bit shocked, like nobody has done this before.
So you are currently serving as the president of the Texas Exes. You started that in July.
I did.
Correct. And so I saw you at one of the football games down on the field waving to the 105,000 people in the crowd. So I know you were there at the investiture yesterday of President Davis. So you are having some phenomenal opportunities to engage with the UT community. So tell us a little bit about that role.
Well, it is just a wonderful opportunity. I am the 101st president. I think it was started in 1893 or something like that. So it is one of the nation's largest alumni associations. We have 585,000 living members. We have 120,000 life members, and there are probably about 20 or 30,000 or so annual members. I have been active as an alumni ever since I graduated undergrad. I joined at the student level. And that was important to me because I feel like I always have ideas. I'm always looking for ways to improve things. And the way that I do that is becoming a part of the whatever it is that I think that I can contribute to making changes.
As you said.
I always put my hand up, always. And then I try to do it to the best of my ability. But I've had just some fantastic experiences. Before I forget to say it, one of the things that I'll get to do is speak at commencement. I'm not the only speaker, but I'm one of the speakers at commencement as president of the Texas Exes. And that's something that I'm really looking forward to. But I engage with alumni all around the world, and we have alumni everywhere. I have three primary focuses that I'm working on, and that's increasing engagement, and scholarships. We are one of the biggest sponsor of scholarships that go out to the entire university. And then I've added to it sportsmanship. And my definition of sportsmanship is really civility, treating one another with respect and dignity and resolving differences. And I see it primarily between the various schools, between the various offices, but treating one another with sportsmanship. We do it so well out on the football field, on the soccer field, in all of our sports events here at UT. We still see people giving the high five when they win, no matter what. I saw last week the helmet. They still hit each other with the helmets at the end of the football game, opposite teams. I said, let's do that as we are trying to resolve issues between the offices. So it has been really one of the highlights of my life serving in this position. I'm trying to, as Barbara Jordan would say, do as much good as I can and exert as much influence in a positive way that I can. But it's really been just a fun job as well.
I think that's phenomenal. And at the Texas OU game, I will say my hand was sore from all the high fives. So yes, there's definitely room for that to have that sportsmanship and all around us everywhere right now. I'll have one more question for you and then see if we have a few minutes to take questions from the audience or on Zoom. So while people think of questions, so looking back at your days here at Texas Law, what piece of advice would you offer your younger self?
Be involved. Be involved in as many things as you can. You all probably know how to do this already, but spend time with your professors. Now that I have served as a professor, I see just how wonderful it is when a student comes up and wants to talk to you, when a student comes up and trusts you enough to want your advice on something. And I think all students are a little shy. I was a little shy, probably could have spent a little more time with professors, especially when I think about the ones that are gone, Charles Allen Wright and Dean Keaton and all of them. So you are licensed as a student to do so many things that aren't the same once you graduate. So take advantage of all of it. That's probably the biggest thing that I would say. You're just licensed to do so many things as a student.
Note that. I would love to open it up to questions to have this wonderful resource of a lady. Any questions?
Hi, Stacy.
Let's take the microphone so people on Zoom can hear you.
Just wondering from your in-house counsel time, if you could talk about giving that risk advice and having your principal come back and not accept it and how you managed that and dealt with it afterwards.
Well, there were some instances where I have to say that based on my recall, in almost every instance, people would moderate at least a little bit once there are some who would want to see like a legal tree analysis, the decision tree analysis, and we would figure out how to get that done. In some instances, we, the legal team, might try to create opportunities for delay, build more time so that management would have more time to think it through and not take immediate action, especially if we saw that there were immediate risks that we might not be able to mitigate. In most instances, it seemed as though more conversation, more talking, us being very deliberate, but not defensive, would always seem to work. I don't remember any instance where somebody said, no, we're just going to do this. We always found ways to just continue talking, which just that process would extend the time and give us more time.
Any other questions in the room? Opportunity. All right, I'll finish with one. Tell us about how you served the federal government for 35 years, which is phenomenal. But if you want to dip your toe into the world of public service, how do you get started doing that, either, in a volunteer role or, you actually served decades? But,
Yeah. Well, let me create a little bit of context around that and talk a little bit about my time of service, because it's the role of federal government is changing right now. When I started, as a very young lawyer, and from that time until I retired, I really worked for about 12 different chairmen of both parties. That was interesting in and of itself. And I always seemed to be at a level where at one time or another, I got to brief or speak to a president. So when I think back, I don't know why I was thinking about this last night, perhaps seeing all the pomp and circumstance of the investiture. I thought back to when I met Ronald Reagan, I met Bill Clinton, met George Bush, our great Texas president, and then, of course, briefed Obama a lot because that was the windup of the 2007-8 crisis. And then, of course, during 2018, got to meet President Trump during his first tenure. I have to say, in each of those meetings, and some of them I met more than once, I felt like I was always reinventing myself. Because again, once you get to that level, once you're a president of the United States, confirmed by Congress and the Senate, you have the right to be whoever you want to be. And then if I'm going to be trying to help you, then I have to myself change a little bit in terms of understanding who you are, what you're talking about. With the various presidents, there were some who would make remarks, and I would follow up to say, Mr. President, that's great. Now, let me just add a little something to that. So, lawyer talk is that, now let me just clarify a little bit, but I wouldn't dare use those words. But it was fun. But that's all to say, when you're in the federal government, and then with the 12 chairmen, it was exactly the same. I had to learn, who are you? What's your legacy? What do you want to be known for? How do you want to manage? What do you want staff to think about you? And I was almost in every situation the person who was responsible for that. And I always had to change myself a little bit and be a different person when I was with staff than I was with them, and do the communication, not exactly, but close enough to where there was some understanding. But federal government is changing so much now. I definitely feel that there is a need for federal government. To what degree and to what extent, some of that is being evaluated, and we'll learn more about that as things continue to happen. But I think that to the extent you have a passion or an interest in public service, it is probably one of the greatest forms of service that you can give, keeping people safe and just safe and healthy and protected. But I used to say, it is not for the faint of heart. Working for the government is not for the faint of heart because you will always be a little bit misunderstood. There will always be people who do not understand your worth or your value, why you exist or what you're doing. And so I used to always tell my folks when I was sending them out to go speak to groups, I want you to educate, but not alienate. And so be gentle in your talking. Try to help people to understand why you do what you do, why we need the services and the products that we provide. But do not do so in a way that alienates individuals. And I think that that is still something that's required. You know, as I mentioned, I didn't know anything about federal service until I met Barbara Jordan. I don't know that that's any different now. There are not a lot of federal government agencies that are here. There are some state agencies, but federal government is a little bit different. So you would need to research that, see where you might have an interest, see where you might want to make a contribution. Try to talk to individuals that are perhaps in that discipline and, you know, try to find out how they got into it. Learn how it's going just to make sure that it's still something that you have an interest in. But I think communicating, researching, trying to just think about what your passion is. You asked me a question earlier. I really think that I probably would not stay in government as many years as I did now these days. I stayed because, as I mentioned, I got a promotion almost every time that there was a crisis. I like doing things that are challenging. I like doing things that are very different. And to the extent that I was always learning something new, doing something different, and moving into a different job, but still under the umbrella of the same organization, that's a big part of what kept me. I don't think that I would have stayed if I were doing the same job over and over every day for 40 years, but I was always creating something, doing something new and something different.
I have taken my own notes up here today, the wise words of Arleas: flexibility, put your hand up, make sure you're learning what the role is, educate but not alienate. So I have thoroughly enjoyed getting to visit with you today. I think it's phenomenal that we have had you here. So thank you for being here. For those of you in the room, don't forget to sign up for your CLE. If you're on Zoom, we've got you. If you called in by phone, make sure to send us an email so we know that you were present today and can get you the CLE information. Can we please give Arleas a fantastic round of applause? And thank you all for being here.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Hook 'em
It's
horns.
been a pleasure. Hook 'em horns. Thank you all.
Thank y'all very much.